The Sopranos is at the top of mostly everybody's list who's seen it. And there's no question that it belongs there. It's premium, varnished quality and attention to detail. One thing about The Sopranos is that many plot lines were written 1 year at a time, like most series. And you can't really blame them for that. Let's imagine the prospect of it if it was all written at one time. I'll get into detail on season 1 in a minute, but let's first address a broad overview. The intro would benefit from subtle but noticeable changes each season other than the World Trade Center. The Jersey side of the tunnel to the Soprano house is supposed to be a 25-minute drive, so maybe most shots could be reused, but with some different shit to look at. He could even take different routes to go the extra mile. The storylines contained to one episode can be neat, but it shouldn't be the standard that they adhere to zealously. It results in a deprivation of cliffhangers, and individual scenes and episodes being memorable at the expense of seasons. Each season could have more of a distinct identity to it. It would also make my DVDs look a lot cooler, as there'd be more to work with. I got nothing against him, but nobody's tuning in and saying to themselves, I wonder what Silvio will get up to in this episode. I don't know if it's an unpopular opinion, but a lot of the soundtrack is downright mid. There's a few good ones, though. Melfi is completely detached when talking to Tony, showing no signs of personality. She should share the occasional anecdote for various trivial matters. I understand it's a lot to ask given the busy pacing of most episodes, but there's a deficit of establishing shots, especially in later seasons. I've been watching this thing since Moses wore short pants, but still couldn't describe the exterior of Uncle June's house at all. I find that kind of thing to be, immersive. Placelessness is my sworn enemy. The number of flashbacks to earlier episodes could be reduced by more than half. What might be better is flashbacks to other events that might be relevant. It would also make the Christmas episode in Season 3 seem less out of place if more flashbacks were like that.
Look at her face! You got a fucking smile on her
Here's an
face!
idea. Tony talks like a gringo in the first episode with a faint accent, and he could have talked that way throughout the series. There would be upsides and downsides to that idea. It would emphasize his isolation from everyone as boss, and how he often questions his identity. He would be less cartoonish, not that he really is to begin with. Of course, Kevin Finnerty's accent would have to be exaggerated more to have the same effect that it does.
He slapped me in the mouth.
The second episode has the only cold open sequence before the credits in the entire show. How fucking cool would it be to have one in every episode? We met this Gino fella in Season 1 who gets reintroduced as Vito in Season 2. But even though he was just a civilian there, he didn't need to be renamed because Vito actually was something of a civilian in those days. And they should have had him buying items shaped like cocks. The climactic tension and gravity towards the ending would be enhanced greatly if New York wasn't completely peripheral for the first couple seasons, then slowly became relevant. How about Phil is introduced in the middle of Season 1, getting a visit from Carmine in the can. Phil has a memorable story for him about how an inmate he knew was shivved, and how he liked the guy, but it had to happen because his insecurities had him acting impulsively and fucking people over. Carmine is reminded of Tony. Let's say something he did in Season 1 pissed off New York. Then Carmine talks to Junior and is on board with the assassination attempt. The first of which should have took place before Pussy disappeared, with him following Tony instead of Christopher. More scenes with Pussy and Tony would affirm the allegations of them being best friends. Tony never finds out that Carmine had any part in it, and supposedly John would speak to him after on Tony's behalf.
That's my favorite bag. Don't lose.
In my previous car that was legally mandated to be scrapped, peace be upon him, this Smoke on the Water song was on the radio before I got in a major collision, just like Tony. And I can't remember for sure, but swear to Christ, it was also playing in an incident years prior that wasn't much more than a scratch. What the hell happened to Skip
No
after
joke,
season
pal.
2?
You don't want to see my darker side.
The media room appears out of nowhere in season 4. Maybe instead of wallpaper, the room has no finishes, and that's what the wallpaper man is hired to do instead. Tony's smarts is inconsistent. It's out of character of him to claim he won't go to hell.
It's war.
Pussy making sure Tony is watching is way too on the nose. How could there be any question of whether or not he's shooting? It's just the two of them. The way Ralph is introduced is somewhat awkward. I know they're very different, but at first he comes across as too similar to Richie Aprile, as they're both loose cannon types who show up at the start of a new season. This is easily fixed by just having Ralph's first appearance somewheres in season 2. I'm no fan of the excessive, artificial, forced diversity, especially commercials on network TV are the fucking worst. But some more important roles for the Moulignons would make sense in Jersey. In this scene outside Satriale's, it should be the guy known as the Reverend who talks to Tony instead of Agent Harris. And needless to say, he should have made more appearances later on. Dream sequences should be sparsely detailed in the background, like with furniture missing or furniture that's abstract looking and shit. No labels on the drinks, maybe labels that look like AI pictures.
Who wrote the Star Spangled Banner?
Martin Luther King.
That's you. You know this. Francis Scott Key.
Kurwa tvoya mać.
You know what? He's right. It's not enough they're raped by taxes and everything. The thought of memorizing political figures from history makes the illegal alien approach all the more appealing. Instead, they should have to beat the ICE agents at Scrabble. Communication is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned, and literacy. People who are sending voice messages on WhatsApp all day are probably dependent on doing that because they struggle to read and write. I don't know what happened to the ones who supposedly built the railroads, but in my experience, Orientals who can speak English is something unheard of outside California, other than a fraction of the ones who are my age or younger. Speaking of China, they've already built the framework for who to take. Check their social credit scores and flip them upside down. Why would you let people with high social credit scores into America? There's plenty of lame and mundane shit in season 3 and 4. The more memorable moments would define the seasons more if they were shortened to about 10 episodes each, without necessarily removing any plot lines but just shortening them, and without the strict criteria of containing them to one episode. Patsy is known to be involved in Tony's death, so how about he's friends with New York as early as possible, instead of or in addition to Ralph? How about he sells suits to both Johnny Sack and Carmine? Tony should know better than to waste his time using a fucking elliptical. At his size, he probably got a better workout from the basement stairs.
Terrify me of that middle age.
When Ralph is being a madman in that one episode, he's obviously on coke, but given that he's still a relatively new character at this time, he should be shown doing it. The Many Saints of Newark is an atrocious mess that mostly consists of overwhelming density of fan service, but the better parts of it could have been shown throughout season 3. Some of Newark's history fits in the context of the season. Maybe I'm slow for not noticing sooner, but I just realized that the Russian guy's addiction problem gets passed on to Christopher. Maybe when Polly shoots him, Christopher should clutch his head as if he got cursed at that moment. I'm not taking myself 100% serious in saying this, it's just an idea. I'm going to talk more about the Russian in the season 6 chapter. I've seen theories saying that the outrageous Jackie Jr. death scene is meant to look like if Jackie Jr. himself directed it.
I'm gonna decide to believe you, okay?
Is Junior's singing in different languages at the end supposed to have some meaning, or were they just fucking around? I don't think it works as an ending. The sequence with Patsy threatening Gloria Trillo should have taken place in this episode. Then following Junior's singing is the ending of the previous episode. You're saying that's not enough. So how about along with that, look at the buildings that were shown in the flashback sequences 20, 30 years later.
Hey, you, who isn't subscribed yet?
You're lucky I got a man of gut in the oven, or I'd bash your face into a bolognese. That's two kinds of food. That's how angry I am.
She couldn't even handle the Nancy Drew. It was too mysterious.
What were they thinking with this wild bird center sign? When Johnny attacks this guy for laughing, instead of being with whoever he is with here, this is when Butchie should be introduced. AJ having an extremely wealthy friend is moderately interesting, but...
But halfway through it, I'm thinking, this is bullshit. Wasting my fucking time. So I shut it off.
Good for you. What did you do instead?
Went out in the yard, burn ants with a magnifying glaze.
It's clear that Johnny Sack moving to Jersey results in him sticking his beak in. The show could have highlighted his subconsciously malevolent implications. It could be as simple as either of the moments when Melfi or Artie Bucco talks about this is followed directly with an ominous Johnny Sack scene. This exposition about Tony B from Season 5 should be moved to Season 4, including Tony having an attack. You'd think Tony B would be talked about sooner, given how close they were, and this season could benefit from this scene more than Season 5. Episodes 7 and 8 could be swapped. Then Tony attacks Zellman after all that business with Valentina, highlighting that he's jealous of Ralph, and that was his motive for investigation of his private affairs.
What's this, some psychology? Huh?
Following that, Tony attacking Zellman would have increased shock value, and he seemingly couldn't do that to Ralph because he's making him so much money. There's some sort of allegory for the world in there.
Very allegorical.
White Caps is one of the best episodes. Would be even better with all the additions of New York developments I mentioned. This season's ending is also not all that memorable. How about the final scene is Tony entering his mother's house with a suitcase with the lights off. A shadow is cast on the staircase resembling a person that disappears when he hits the light switch.
Satanic black magic. Sick shit. There he is, the king of breadsticks.
Give me a breadstick up your ass, come here.
Tony distinctly plans to quit therapy for a while, so it should be a few episodes in before he visits Melfi again. It's also out of character for him to misspell the word regard in that letter. Come on now, Tony knows how to spell. It's alright that Tony B gets an odd introduction wearing this oversized blazer, but then he goes on to wear that to the party later on. He should have changed into something else. Remember this god-awful comedian who appeared at Green Grove in Season 1 and later on at the Bing? He should have been there again in the Irregular Around the Margins episode when Christopher storms in with his gun. Blundetto should practice his massage therapy on Adriana, which would be reminiscent of Pussy. Tony should have sent Bobby to kill him instead of doing it himself. This would justify his raised status in Season 6 beyond his marriage to Janice. And the events of the Soprano Home Movies episode would still be substantial regardless. Also, I'm no expert, but wouldn't a shotgun shell to the head be a lot more gruesome? The scene with Tony seeing his painting at Polly's is good in essence, but it's shot strangely and goes by too fast. Tony doesn't sound nearly confused enough. Should be slowed way down because of how bizarre it is.
She gets nothing, because I got the scars. So it's mine.
You don't answer, someone calls you.
What a fucking strange way for an episode to begin, with Rusty reading a wedding invitation and then a 6 weeks later title card.
For the love of Mike.
The actor who plays criminal mastermind Benny Fazio should have been casted as somebody else. He's just too much of a pencil neck, and he's clearly an actor. He's got the right phenotype, though. And Carlo does too. but he's often got some kind of expression on his face that makes him look like a civilian. This episode has a complicated dispute between Artie, Benny, and Tony, in which the way they all handle it is very in character, but it's something of an anticlimax when Artie gets so worked up with no resolution. How about he bans Tony from Vesuvio and all of his friends? Not that he's a fan favorite or anything, but Melfi's son is never spoken of after season 4. Maybe she should say something about him when Tony asks what to do about his son. The hideous monstrosity of a house Christopher bought should have got him whacked. Tony's season 6 arc involves him aiming to be a better man at first, before regressing into his evil and villainous ways. Maybe he should peak a little higher and go on to reach a bottom that is a little lower.
God fuck it all.
There's a boat scene prior to AJ going after Junior. Maybe instead the boat scene should come afterwards, with Tony having a more heart-to-heart conversation with AJ about how he wants a better future for him. Also, when Tony is accosted by Gino, he warns him to leave New Jersey today to protect him from even himself if he sees him again. As for the bottom, Janice's anger management plotline should begin in season 5, but the ending should be moved to season 6. Tony's already miserable enough in that episode without that. They originally planned for the Russian to make an appearance in season 6, and it was cut in an effort to be more mysterious. And sure, it works well as a mystery, no doubt, but this show has no shortage of mysteries. How about he's shown in the background very briefly at the hotel that Tony and Polly go to in Virginia? And with what I mentioned earlier, he's clean and sober now. Of course, it would be difficult to convey his sobriety if he's just in the background. The original plan, the lore, whatever, was that the gunshot lobotomized him and turned him into a retard. And if that was evident enough, it goes without saying he'd be sober. I like this idea because it transcends Christopher's arc to speak volumes to Tony's as well. The apparent allure to Tony of being a brain-dead, ignorant, happy-go-lucky individual somewhere on the range between Kevin Finnerty and Tony's horse, and all the animals he sympathizes with. Insecurity being one of his biggest faults is a product of some degree of awareness and smarts. People will praise you for all the small nuances you throw in there. I'm not saying they're not well thought out, but in theory they could come from nothing. I said some things earlier in this video that was just like half a thought, but there is substance there that you can build upon. This isn't my greatest idea ever, but the boss from Cleaver should kill the girl in some way. Then after Christopher dies while Tony is out smoking mushrooms in Vegas, Carmela screens Cleaver by herself and notices the scene, understanding the implications, showing how all of Tony's beneficiaries accept him for the scoundrel he is. Similarly to Carmela, Artie apologizes to Tony and unbans him from Vesuvio, citing that his patronage creates a buzz. And Tony apologizes too, telling him that he won't rack up a tab and will pay him like a normal customer. He can afford it. On the other hand, the long list of enemies conspiring to destroy him could be added to. Hesh already communicated his concerns very clearly regarding Tony's reluctance to pay him back. In the desperate situation in the second last episode, Tony should solicit him for another $50,000, which he's in no position to refuse. Other than Harris, all the feds disappear in season 6. Perhaps they're still on them, with Skip as their ringleader. He is shown accosting Carlo, affirming that he flipped. The conversation between Tony and Junior should last longer. Tony asks him about his father. Junior says, "My father? John F. Kennedy." And maybe they sit in silence for a bit.